Welcome to this video on Introduction to Functions Part 9. In this video, we're going to look at three functions. The first function we're going to look at is the COUNTIF function. We'll then look at the COUNTIFs and then the frequency function. Now, the COUNTIF function is a function that counts a particular item or cell within a given range if it meets a given criteria, which means for a cell to be counted or an item to be counted, it must meet a given criteria. Now, the COUNTIFs also count a particular cell or item within a given range if it meets all given criteria, which means while the COUNTIF will be talking of just one criteria or one condition, the COUNTIFs will be talking of multiple criteria to be met before counting is effected. Now, the frequency function is a function that is used to determine how often a particular item occurs within a given data array, given data range. And usually the answers for frequency function is usually entered as an array. We've seen how array functions are ended using the Control Shift and Enter keys. So let's go to our data. Now we have this data here of staff names and their scores, probably in an appraisal exercise, and we are given this rating that staff within 0 to 40 we have a rating of F, staff within 41 to 50 we have a rating of E, and staff greater than 80 we have a rating of A. Now we need to find out the number of staff that's called F rating within this particular range. Now altogether we have 68 staff. So of that number, how many staff scored less than or equal to 40? So the criteria for rating any particular participant as F means you must score below or 40 marks, which is just one condition, less than or equal to 40. So we'll be using the COUNTIF function. Now this is the syntax for the COUNTIF function. Is equal to COUNTIF bracket open. You highlight the range, in which case the range from where you are going to do the counting. For this exercise, the whole of this down is going to be our range. Now, what would the criteria be? For a participant to have F, the criteria will be less than or equal to 40. Now, when we get to E, the condition to be met before you score an E, first you must score above 40. The first thing, you must score above 40. Secondly, your scores have to be 50 or below. So there are two conditions to be met there. Your scores must be above 40 and you shouldn't score above 50. When there are two conditions. Now when we get two conditions, we are going to talk about COUNTIFs. Now the COUNTIFs syntax is equal to COUNTIFs bracket open criteria range 1. That is the range where the first criteria should be selected from. Now you now take the criteria and you take the range where the second criteria will be selected from and take the second criteria. If you have up to 10 criteria, you continue selecting them. Now in this particular case, where we are having the first criteria, which is the group less than or greater than 40 and the group less than or equal to 50 at the same range. So we are going to be duplicating this range in that case. So since it's multiple criteria, we'll be looking at the COUNTIFs. We'll look at the frequency functions later on. So let's look at how many persons score 40 or below using the COUNTIF function. So I'm going to type equal to COUNTIF. I just scroll to COUNTIF. I open a bracket and it's asking me for range, which is our R. And the range is the whole of this scores. That is my range. And I'm going to hold that range fixed because it's a fixed range, and I take my comma. Now it's asking what is the criteria. Now we know the criteria is that the staff should score less than or equal to 40, and we're introducing that, so we open a quote and say less than or equal to 40, and we close that quote. So we press our enter key and we are told 8 persons score F in that rating. Now we get to E. We know E is multiple criteria, greater than 40, less than or equal to 50. So we're going to use COUNTIFs. So I'm going to say equal to COUNTIFs. I take this and I open the bracket. So the first criteria is asking us criteria range 1. Now we are using the same range, and I hold this fixed. I take comma. Now what is the first criteria to be met? The first criteria is that you have to score above 40. So the first criteria is that you should score greater than 40. That is the first criteria. So I take a comma, and it's asking for the criteria range 2. The second criteria range would be the same range because we don't have any other range for this particular exercise. And I take that to hold it fixed, and now we are asked for the second criteria. Second criteria is that you should score less or equal to 50. So I'm going to put that in quotes, less or equal to 50. Hope that's correct. And I close the quote and I press my enter key. So we are told 16 persons got E. Now I can copy this down and change the criteria since they are all multiple criteria, except okay, let's do it up to B, and I take control down. So now all I need to do is to change the criteria. When I get to D, the criteria will be greater than 50 and less or equal to 60. Now the criteria for this one will be greater than 60, and less or equal to 70. That's it. So here will be greater than 70, less or equal to 80. Okay, now the last one is saying 81 to 100. So we are going to say greater than 80, less or equal to 100. It's simply saying greater than 80 because there's no upper limit. So I'm going to copy this sum if here, and I'm going to say greater than 80. So I'm just going to use that and say greater than 80. I hope you understand that. I'm saying for us to get the last grade, which is A, the participant should score greater than 80. So I'm not going to use less than or equal to. That's strictly not necessary. Now that's how we use our if and ifs statement, I mean the count if and count if statement. Now, but let's try to do this separately using a statistical function which is called the frequency function. Now the frequency function can be used to achieve this also. Now let's first find the total. Now the total is 68. That means we are right because we found out that the total number of participants here is 68. So we know that we are very correct here. Now we can use the frequency function to actually get these numbers. And the frequency function is equal to frequency bracket open. This is the data array range, and B is the upper class boundary of each band. Now for the purpose of this exercise, we've done the band 0 to 40, and the upper class boundary here is 40. Here the upper class boundary is 50. So we're talking of B here is the upper class boundary of each band. Now we are going to highlight the whole of that because it's entered as an array, like we explained an array earlier on. And we're going to say equal to frequency. So I take my frequency, and it's asking for the data array, which is the whole of this particular range. And I can hold that fixed, doesn't really matter because it's an array. I take a comma. It's asking me for the bin. Now the bin, which is the B, is the upper class boundary of each band. So I highlight this, and I'm going to take Control, Shift, and Enter. That's how to enter to end an array formula. So I take Control, Shift, and I press Enter. Wow, that's great. So you see, we've gotten the same thing we got when we have this. If we add up that, you see we have 68. So that's how to use the frequency function. So when you're working and have an exercise like this, you might either choose to use the count if function, or you use the frequency function. That's all we have for this exercise. We've looked at the count if, the count ifs, and the frequency function. Thank you very much for listening. Bye bye.